Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Chapter 21. Natsu was killed by one punch. Ha ha ha, has my reputation spread everywhere? Not noticing the eyes of the guild members at all, Natsu looked up to the sky and laughed triumphantly. Luo Zhen smiled, and was about to shake the fool in front of him again. Suddenly, there was a sound of heavy footsteps at the door. Everyone followed the footsteps and saw a figure in armor walking in slowly at the door. Carrying a huge package, Urza dropped the package on the ground with a bang. What are you all making noise about? Throwing the package on the ground, Urza glanced at everyone one by one with sharp eyes. Suddenly his eyes fell on a familiar figure, and he didn't bother to reprimand the people around him. Quickly trotted to the front of this figure. Seeing that familiar face, Urza's eye sockets turned rosy. When did you come back? Looking at Urza, who has grown up a lot in front of him, Luo Zhen grinned and said, "Just a few days after I came back, I heard from the president that you were going to do a commission, and there was no one at home, so I sat in the guild for a while when I had nothing to do. Sit. Then let's go home." With red eyes, Urza reached out and put his hand on the back of Luo Zhen's. "Wait, you two know each other?" Natsu on the side suddenly made a sound, interrupting the reminiscence between the two. In Urza's dangerous eyes, he pointed to Luo Zhen and said, "Isn't this guy a newcomer who just joined the guild? How did you know each other?" Seeing the somewhat intimate behavior of the two, Natsu was completely puzzled. "You are stupid, Luo Zhen is an S-rank mage of our guild." Urza rolled his eyes, glared at Natsu, pulled Luo Zhen and was about to leave. "Luo Zhen, are you the powerful brat that uncle said?" Hearing Luo Zhen's name, Natsu's eyes lit up immediately. He quickly blocked their way, and looked at them excitedly. "Come and fight me, Luo Zhen. I will defeat you and become the strongest." Natsu's eyes burst out with fighting intent, and he stared at Luo Zhen excitedly and shouted. Urza walked up to Luo Zhen, glared at Natsu and said, "Don't be kidding, Natsu, how could you be Luo Zhen's opponent? How is it impossible? I will definitely become the strongest in the guild." Natsu yelled, excitedly about to fight Luo Zhen. Looking at the excited Natsu, the corners of Luo Zhen's mouth curled up slightly. He took Urza's arm and pulled him aside. "Urza, a man's serious duel can't be disappointing." Seeing Luo Zhen's slightly playful expression, Urza could not help but walk aside while holding his forehead. "Come on, Natsu, let me see you." Standing where he was, Luo Zhen hooked his fingers at Natsu. "Coming," Natsu shouted loudly, and rushed straight to Luo Zhen. Boom! With a loud noise, Natsu's body instantly fell to the ground straight. There was a big lump on his head, and he was knocked out by Luo Zhen's punch. Natsu. Behind Natsu, Happy with folded arms was still watching the show. Seeing Natsu being knocked down in an instant, he made a surprised sound. "Fly to Natsu's side and turn Natsu over." Seeing this, Natsu was punched and rolled his eyes, and the whole person lost consciousness directly. "It's too strong." A little scared, he raised his head to look at Luo Zhen, and then looked at Natsu on the ground with worried eyes. "It's okay, I just fainted, I didn't use all my strength." Looking at the worried Happy, Luo Zhen knelt down and rubbed Blue's kitten's head. "What? Luo Zhen hasn't used his full strength yet?" Happy was very surprised. He didn't expect that the strength gap between Luo Zhen and Natsu was so big. Luo Zhen showed a smile at the corner of his mouth, looked at the shocked Happy and said with a smile, "Yes, it probably took less than 1/10 of the strength." "You are a monster." The small body took 2 steps back, and the originally awe-inspiring eyes instantly turned into horror. "Take good care of Natsu, I'll go back first. Bye, little Happy." Pulling Urza's white and tender palm, Luo Zhen waved to Happy, who was still pushing Natsu's body. It wasn't until Luo Zhen's figure left the guild that everyone returned to Natsu's side. "It's a pain in the ass now. I didn't expect that Luo Zhen would have such a naughty time. But Luo Zhen has become stronger again, didn't he only use 1/10 of the strength just now? I feel like that punch could blow my head apart." The members of the guild surrounded him, but no one cared about Natsu, who fell to the ground. Since Luo Zhen said that he just passed out, it means there must be nothing wrong. Walking on the road, Luo Zhen looked at Urza carrying such a huge package, and couldn't help but have black lines all over his head. "Urza, what the hell is in your package?" Originally Luo Zhen wanted to help, but was rejected by Urza, Luo Zhen helplessly looked at the package that was bigger than a person and asked. Just some clothes and weapons. Urza puffed up his chest, looked at the huge package behind him and said with a smile. Hey, you're here for a commission, not a trip. With black lines all over Luo Zhen's face, he couldn't help complaining to Urza. But it's full of necessities. Urza turned his head away, completely unaware that there was anything wrong with him. Seeing the innocent expression on Urza's face, Luo Zhen helplessly spread his hands and said, okay, just be happy. Back home, Luo Zhen stretched lazily. Master, you are back. As soon as Luo Zhen returned home, Zeus and Prometheus flew over. Well, let's go play. Waving at them, Luo Zhen took down Urza's huge package. Did you have meal? After returning home, Urza changed the armor on his body and wore a white dress on his body. Without sitting down to rest for a while, Urza walked into the kitchen and got busy. Looking at Urza's busy back, Luo Zhen felt like a family of two. Time to eat. Soon, Urza finished the meal, stood in front of the dining table and shouted to Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen trotted to the kitchen, washed his hands and went to the dining room. It's so fragrant, just smelling it will make you full. Luo Zhen grinned and said with a thumbs up to Urza. Gazing at Luo Zhen, Urza said softly, hurry up and eat. Chapter 22. After eating and drinking enough, Luo Zhen sat lazily on the sofa, and Zeus squeezed beside Luo Zhen, allowing Luo Zhen to lean on him comfortably. Urza cleaned the dishes and came to the living room wiping his hands. Looking at Luo Zhen who was slumped on the sofa, Urza couldn't help saying to Luo Zhen, you can't lie down just after eating. Get up and go for a walk. Looking at Urza, who already looked like a disciplinary committee member in the original book, Luo Zhen waved his hand and said, I don't want to move anymore. Urza put his hands on his hips and stared straight at Luo Zhen. All right. Being stared at by Urza without saying a word, Luo Zhen was finally defeated and got up helplessly to follow behind Luo Zhen. As the sun set, Urza and Luo Zhen walked side by side on the street. The orange sunset sprinkled on the two of them, stretching their shadows extremely long and narrow. Luo Zhen, when are you going to leave this time? Walking on the road, Urza put his hands behind his back and looked down at the ground. Luo Zhen's arm was hanging on Urza's shoulder, and he replied with a smile, this time, it should not be so fast. The president said he had something to do with me, but he forgot to ask him what's the matter. With a blush on his face, Urza raised his head and gave Luo Zhen a white look. The president should have something important to ask you, don't you need to ask? Forget it, the old man would have come to me long ago if he had something important to do. Luo Zhen rolled his eyes, shrugged and said. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Urza also nodded. Makes sense. As the sun went down, the two went home after a long walk in Magnolia. Because Urza just came back today, he went back to his room early to sleep. The next day, Luo really slept comfortably. After waking up, Luo Zhen stretched and let out a strange moan. Walk out of the room, Urza is not at home. After washing up, Luo Zhen also walked towards the guild. As soon as he entered the guild, Luo Zhen immediately heard the noisy voices of Gray and Natsu. Yo, are you two in such good spirits? Luo Zhen grinned and greeted the two with their heads on their heads. It's Luo Zhen, good morning. Hearing the voice, Gray looked over and said with a smile on his face. Why did you undress to say hello? Luo Zhen's complexion turned dark, and he complained as he looked at Gray, who was stripped down to only his underwear. When? Ha, you perverted underwear man. Stop rambling, fire-breathing bastard. What did you say, you naked man? Who are you calling a naked man, bastard? The two quarreled again without saying a word. Luo Zhen found a seat and sat down, watching the two fight each other with one punch and one kick. Luo Zhen, come here for a moment. At this moment, the groom Carlo, who was already a little drunk sitting on the bar, yelled at Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen raised his head, looked at Mr. Carlo the horse, stood up and walked towards the bar. President, what's wrong? Carelessly, he sat down next to the horse Carlo, and took a bottle of wine from the bar. Don't always drink wine from the guild, bastard. Well, President, don't be so stingy. Luo Zhen took a sip of his wine with a smile, and put an arm around Carlo's shoulder. What do you think of this year's S-Class Mage assessment? The two sat side by side, watching Gray and Natsu fight not far away, and Carlos suddenly asked Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen turned his head in surprise, and asked Carlos the horse, "What?" "It's time for this year's assessment again." With black lines all over his face, Carlos yelled at Luo Zhen, "Have you ever paid attention to the things in the guild?" Everyone's eyes were attracted by the movement of Carlos the horse and Luo Zhen. Karloff waved his hand, then asked Luo Zhen with a serious expression, "You will be the examiner for this year's assessment." "Me, president, are you kidding me?" Luo Zhen was surprised and pointed at himself with his finger. "Now you are the only S-mage in the guild who is still in Magnolia. If you don't serve as the examiner, I will go." Carlos stared, stood up, and stood on the bar, barely touching Luo Zhen's shoulder. Patting Luo Zhen on the shoulder, he said in a deep tone, "Young people, the greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. President, are you not afraid that I will release water to Urza?" Luo Zhen didn't refuse either, and it happened that he didn't plan to go out to make commissions during this time, so he said to Mrs. Carlo with a meaningful smile, "You're not that kind of person, and Urza won't accept it." Karloff didn't care about this matter at all, and said with a smile on his face, "Okay, I accept." Seeing that he seemed to have been manipulated by the horseman Carlos, Luo Zhen shrugged helplessly. Because the assessment day for the S-level mages is approaching, most of the members of the guild have returned. All members gather in the guild except Gildart's and Lajertha's and Thor's congregation. Soon, the day of the S-class mages assessment will arrive. Luo Zhen sat beside the horseman Carlo, looking at the people in the guild with a smile. This year's S-rank mage assessment has officially started. Following Carlos Ma's announcement, everyone turned their attention to the three standing in front. Urza, Mirajan, and Kana. Last year's S-level assessment was the three of them. I didn't expect it to be them again this year. I hope someone can pass this year, and Fairy Tail can add another S-class mage. Urza, come on. Kana, beat them up, come on. Sister Mira, you are the best, come on. Everyone in the field cheered and cheered for the three of them. Luo Zhen, I'll leave it to you. Karloff set his eyes on the smiling Luo Zhen. Nodding his head, Luo Zhen put away his lazy look, straightened up, and looked at the three of them with a smile on his face. "Hello, I'm the examiner for this S-class mage assessment." Luo Zhen grinned, with a smile in his eyes. Sure enough, the examiner is Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen won't put water on Urza, will he? What nonsense are you talking about? Are you doubting the personality of Luo Zhen and Urza? You take these three maps. Luo Zhen waved his right hand, and three maps appeared in front of the three of them. After the three got their respective maps, Luo Zhen said with a grin. Then now I will announce the content of this assessment. Chapter 23. You all have a map in your hand, and each has a destination on it. Your assessment is to go to the destination, get back the things I put there, and come to me at the location on the opposite side of the map. By the way, if you can meet each other on the road, you can snatch each other's items. If the items are lost, then it will be regarded as a failure of the assessment. See you next year. Luo Zhen stood up and said to the three girls standing in front of him. The three of them looked at the map in their hands, and their destinations were not very far from Magnolia. Then, the assessment begins now. Because the content of this assessment was determined by Luo Zhen did not ask them to find their own partners, but let them complete it alone. As Luo Zhen announced the start of the assessment, the three of them looked at each other, and Mirajan rushed out of the guild first. Yiki Juchin disappeared from everyone's sight. Urza and Kana looked at each other warily as Mirajan disappeared. Soon, he chased Mirajan's back and rushed out of the guild. Sitting on the chair, Luo Zhen yawned and continued to lean back lazily. Looking at the lazy Luo Zhen, the horseman's head was suddenly covered with black lines. Hey, brat, don't you plan to set off to see your destination? They came back so soon. Luo Zhen waved his hand, not paying attention to this assessment at all. You didn't arrange Zeus and the others at their destination, did you? Suddenly thought of something, Karloff asked Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen grinned and said, otherwise, wouldn't their assessment be too easy? Although Zeus and the others are good in strength, there is still a gap compared to their strength. As long as they can get the items that Zeus and the others protect, Zeus and the others will stop attacking. Carlos Ma nodded and didn't ask too much. Last year's S-class mage assessment was conducted by Lajerses, but none of them passed the assessment. In the words of Lajerses, what qualifications do these wastes have to become S-class mages? But Ma Karloff knew that the strength of Urza and Mirajan was completely enough. After a while, the members of the guild sat down and discussed who would win this assessment. At this time, Luo Zhen suddenly stood up and stretched. Finally someone arrived. Luo Zhen muttered to himself, then walked out of the guild with his hands in his pockets. Looking at Luo Zhen's back, everyone suddenly became excited. Is it finally about to start? The final assessment. I'm looking forward to it. Damn it, why don't we go and see? At this time, Natsu suddenly proposed to Gray, who was beside him. A little hesitation flashed in Gray's eyes. He looked at the drowsy groom Carlo on the bar, couldn't bear the anticipation in his heart, nodded heavily and said, "Okay. Let's go." The three of Natsu, Gray and Happy looked at the groom Carlo quietly, and then slipped out of the guild. Follow behind the slow Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen walked slowly towards Magnolia's cathedral. It seemed that they had noticed the Gray three behind them. Stopping suddenly, Luo Zhen turned his head with a smile on his face. "You three, what do you want to do by secretly following?" Knowing that they were discovered, Gray and the others simply stopped hiding and jumped out of the alley. "Luo Zhen, we want to see Urza fight. Take me there, take me there." Looking at the sincere eyes of the three of them, Luo Zhen refused without hesitation, "No. Damn it, Luo Zhen, I must go and see it." After being rejected, Natsu shouted loudly, his legs suddenly condensed into flames, and wanted to rush straight past Luo Zhen. Boom! The moment Natsu's figure rushed past Luo Zhen. With a loud noise, Natsu's body suddenly fell to the ground straight. His body was twitching slightly, and a big lump bulged on his head. Another instant kill, Happy exclaimed, flapping its wings and coming to Natsu's side, pushing Natsu's body. "Gray, do you want to come too?" With a smile on his face, Luo Zhen looked at Gray and asked with a smile. "I do not want." Without the slightest hesitation, Gray shook his head decisively. Nodding in satisfaction, Luo Zhen pointed to Natsu, who had passed out beside him, and said, "Then you take this idiot back." "No problem, leave it to me." Gray patted his chest, came to Luo Zhen's side and helped Natsu to leave. After seeing the three of them off, Luo Zhen turned his head and continued walking towards Magnolia's cathedral. It didn't take long to come to the door of the church. The surroundings of the church were extremely quiet, and Luo Zhen sat alone on the steps of the church, waiting for their arrival. "Owner." At this time, the figure of Zeus floated gently behind Luo Zhen, and shouted to Luo Zhen in a low voice. Luo Zhen replied in a flat voice without raising his head. "Sorry master, I didn't stop Mirajan from taking things." Zeus's voice was a little sluggish, and he felt ashamed of Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen smiled, turned around and pulled Zeus's body to his side, propping up his arms. He smiled and said, "Then did you lose to her?" Zeus shook his head decisively. Although he failed to hold the thing, Mirajan couldn't defeat Zeus either. "That's fine, I plan to give things to the three of them." Luo Zhen smiled indifferently, and leaned lazily on Zeus's body. Not long after, Napoleon also appeared. Seeing Napoleon's figure, Luo Zhen was not surprised at all. Although Prometheus was a bit late, he appeared not long after Napoleon appeared. "Now I am here waiting for the arrival of the three of them." Suddenly, an explosion sounded in the distance. Luo Zhen's domineering aura was activated, and he sensed that there were already two people fighting over there. "The show begins." Luo Zhen grinned, sat on Zeus's body and said, "Come on, let's go to the theater." Zeus rushed to the sky and galloped in the direction Luo Zhen pointed. On the ground, Urza was dressed in silver and white armor and held two swords. The person opposite is Mirajan. At this moment, Mirajan was covered with demonic energy, floating in midair with a pair of bat-like wings waving. "Urza, hand over your things." Mirajan squinted and yelled at Urza. "Come and get it if you have the ability." With a sneer, Urza completely ignored Mirajan, raised the long sword in his right hand high, and pointed the sword point at Mirajan. Chapter 24. Sitting cross-legged on top of Zeus, Luo Zhen took out a bunch of snacks out of nowhere, and watched Urza and Mirajan fighting below happily. Seeing this scene, Prometheus and Napoleon, who were floating behind, were immediately covered in black lines, unable to understand Luo Zhen's behavior. The battle below also became intense, and Mirajan, who was originally at odds with Urza, exerted her full strength. The dark magic ball continuously bombarded Urza, making the ground pitted. Suddenly, Luo Zhen came to his senses and asked Prometheus and the others behind him, I can't be blamed for the destruction where they fought, right? Looking at Napoleon, Prometheus wanted to shake his head. Seeing their faces covered in black lines, Luo Zhen turned his head helplessly, and then looked at the battle below. Suddenly, the corners of Luo Zhen's mouth curled up slightly, watching Urza not far from the two fighting. Hey, found a little mouse. I saw Kana poking his head out of the alley with a small head, looking helplessly at Urza and Mirajan who were fighting ahead. Really, why did I meet such a monster-like opponent? Kana was helpless and sat on the ground against the wall. Tian Lun dazzling sword. The sword rain surrounded Urza's back, and as the countless sword rain swept away, Mirajan in the sky flapped its wings and kept dodging attacks. Is this the only level? It's hard for you to hit me like this. Urza. Mirajan in the sky took it easy, while still irritating Urza with constant trash talking. Snort. With a cold snort, Urza held two swords in front of him. Tian Lun. The three swords. The twin swords in his hands attacked at high speed, and a triangular slash went straight to Mirajan. Change to Kuroba armor. Just as Mirajan was dodging, a magic circle flashed under Urza's feet. Directly envelop Urza's body in it. As Tianlin's armor dissipated, a touch of Black's armor appeared on Urza's body. With a shake of the wings behind him, Urza soared into the sky, and with a long sword in his hand, he went straight to Mirajan's face. You underestimate me too much. Urza appeared in front of Mirajan in an instant, with a long sword directly attacking the door. A sneer flashed across Mirajan's face. Black's magical power is condensed in the palm of his right hand. The moment Urza's long sword was about to hit, the movement stopped instantly. I saw Mirajan raised her right hand and stopped in front of Urza. And Urza held his long sword on Mirajan's neck. At this moment, neither of them dared to act rashly. In the alley far away, Kana gritted her teeth and watched Urza and Mirajan fighting in the sky. Finally he sighed deeply. Go out of the alley and rush straight to the direction of the church. Both Urza and Mirajan in the sky noticed Kana's figure, and after looking at each other, they backed away in unison. Let go of you stupid woman for once. Mirajan snorted coldly, and then the wings behind her trembled, and she swooped down directly towards Kana who was running on the ground. I didn't say it was over. Watching Mirajan's swooping figure, Urza naturally knew what she wanted to do, leaving no chance. He rushed straight down, chasing Mirajan's back. Urza soon caught up to Mirajan and the two fought again. Luo Zhen, who was watching the play above, couldn't help feeling a little disappointed when he saw Kana rushing towards the church. Well, sighing, Luo Zhen had no choice but to pat Zeus's body and let Zeus fly in the direction of the church. Back at the door of the church, Luo Zhen sat on the stairs, waiting for Kana's arrival. Not long after, Kana's figure appeared in Luo Zhen's sight. Kana also saw Luo Zhen from afar. Kana, why are you here? Luo Zhen put one hand on Zeus's body, frowning and asked Kana. I am not their opponent. There was a wry smile on Kana's face. Watching the thrilling battle just now, Kana's heart felt trembling for a while. How can I be the opponent of those two monsters? It will definitely be killed in seconds. A look of disappointment flashed in Luo Zhen's eyes. He looked at Kana calmly and said, you know, Kana. Only one person can win the assessment of an S-level mage. Since you don't want to fight them, and you still appear in front of me, then you can only fight me. As he spoke, Luo Zhen hooked his fingers at Kana, letting Kana make the first move. The expression on Kana's face froze. He gritted his teeth, took out a small kit from his pocket and threw it on the ground. With a bitter smile on his face, he said, Luo Zhen, I abstain. The kit was exactly what Luo Zhen asked Prometheus to guard. Luo Zhen nodded and waved to Prometheus, asking him to bring the items. Prometheus was floating in the air, and when he came to Kana, his eyes were full of contempt and disdain. Prometheus felt more aggrieved. How could she let her take things away in her own hands? Taking the things back to the side at home, Luo Zhen opened the kit. Inside was a small note with nothing on it. Throwing the note on Prometheus, the note instantly turned into ashes. Then Kana, you have failed the assessment, you can go back to the guild. With an incomparably calm expression, Luo Zhen said while looking at Kana, who was in a daze. After a long silence, Kana squeezed out a smile, bowed slightly to Luo Zhen, and then ran away from here. Shaking his head, Luo Zhen didn't expect Kana to be so afraid of Urza and Mirajan. Since he was able to participate in the S-level mage assessment, then Kana's strength must not be weak. But things have happened, and there is no regret medicine to take. Luo Zhen continued to observe the fight between Urza and Mirajan amidst his knowledge and arrogance. Just a short while after he left, the battle between the two had already become anxious. Both of them suffered some injuries, but their momentum was even more high-spirited. Wearing Kuroba armor, Urza soared in the sky with wings flapping, holding a long sword and colliding with Mirajan again and again. Mirajan received the soul of Satan and was not afraid of Urza's attack. Chapter 25. Seeing the desperate fighting style of the two, Luo Zhen couldn't help frowning slightly. Patting Zeus beside him, Luo Zhen said, "Zeus, go and stop them, bring them here." Hearing Luo Zhen's order, Zeus soared into the sky and rushed straight to the place where Urza and others were fighting. Soon, due to Zeus's intervention, the two stopped fighting after talking a few trash words to each other. The two waved their wings at the same time, galloping towards the church. Boom! Urza's body fell heavily to the ground, stood up and looked at Luo Zhen, who was sitting on the stairs, and asked, "Why stop us?" Mirajan followed closely behind, staring straight at Luo Zhen, and said with a sneer, "Aren't you going to put water on this dull woman?" "What are you talking about? You spiritual little sister, I will not accept such an assessment. I will defeat you head-on and become an S-class mage in a fair way." "It's hard to say who beats who, you flat woman." The two were natural rivals like Gray and Natsu, and they began to confront each other without saying a word. Luo Zhen held his forehead helplessly, and shouted with black lines all over his head, "Stop it!" A domineering arrogance suddenly erupted from Luo Zhen's body, pressing directly on the two of them. The domineering color that combines Whitebeard and Bigmom is so powerful that it is difficult for the two of them to move in an instant. Seeing the two of them stop, Luo Zhen regained his domineering look. Kneeling down on the ground out of breath, there was a dignified look in the eyes of the two of them. "This breath is so strong. When your battle is over, you don't know how long it will last. So I decided to change the content of the assessment." Luo Zhen spread his hands, pointed to a large mountain not far away and said, "Follow me there." After saying that, Luo Zhen jumped on Zeus's back, and rushed towards the mountain. The two looked at each other and followed without giving in. Soon, Luo Zhen fell into the mountains, where there was a huge open space. After Feng Fan and Urza followed, Luo Zhen said to them with a smile on his face, "This is the venue for the final assessment. Are you ready? Bring it on." "It's already ready." Mirajan and Urza agreed one after another, waiting nervously. "That's fine. Then the final assessment is, if someone can still stand under my attack, that is an S-rank wizard. Let's say it first, people will die. If you want to quit, you can only do it now." Luo Zhen spoke terrifying words with that smiling smile. "Who wants to quit? Come on, Luo Zhen." The two looked at each other. How could the two who were facing each other give up and quit in front of their opponents? "That's fine, I'll only strike once, and those who can still stand up are S-rank wizards. If both of you can stand, I can apply to the president and let your colleagues be promoted." As he said, a white mask formed on Luo Zhen's fists. Change, armor of Vajra. Seeing Luo Zhen's pose, although Urza had never seen it before, he put on the armor with the strongest defense in advance. And Mirajan is still in the form of Satan, ready to meet the attack. Coming. Seeing that the two of them were fully prepared, Luo Zhen didn't hold back either. "Cross your arms across your chest and squat down slightly." His fist slammed down towards the void around him. The next moment, a crackling sound rang in the ears of the two of them. Following the sound, I saw Luo Zhen's side. That fist seemed to completely shatter the void. As the space was shattered, a violent vibration also rushed in. The two held on, not to be engulfed by this turbulent force. Mountains collapsed and the ground crumbled. At this moment, as if the end of the world had arrived, this huge mountain immediately collapsed, and rubble continued to roll down from the mountain. The bodies of Urza and Mirajan were also sent flying by this violent impact, and they hit the ground heavily. Because the place where the three of them stood was relatively open, the gravel did not fall near here. The ground is cracked, and there are long and narrow cracks everywhere. Urza and Mirajan spat blood from their mouths and felt severe pain all over their bodies. Gritting his teeth, he wanted to stand up from the ground, but his limbs had no strength at all. This is because Luo Zhen didn't use all his strength, otherwise he would have killed both of them in one blow. After a long time, neither of them showed signs of standing up. Luo Zhen spread his hands helplessly, looked at the two people who were about to pass out, and said, "Since you have no strength to stand up, I have to announce that no one passed the assessment this time." Saying that, Luo Zhen was about to turn around. "Stop." Suddenly, Urza's weak but firm voice came from behind. Turning around, I saw Urza and Mirajan supporting each other, and stood up, gritted their teeth. We haven't lost yet." Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. Urza gritted his teeth, and spat out a sentence from his mouth intermittently. Because of the original work of the diamond armor, Urza suffered less injuries. Mirajan was about to faint, but her unyielding will made her stare at Luo Zhen with her eyes wide open. Seeing the two supporting each other to stand up, Luo Zhen was a little surprised. With a smile on his face, he watched his body shaking slightly, as if a gust of wind could blow them down. "Congratulations, you passed." Hearing the words in Luo Zhen's mouth, Mirajan's tense nerves were immediately relaxed. When he rolled his eyes, he fainted. The same was true for Urza. After forcing out a smile, he fell straight behind him. Really, just as their bodies were about to fall to the ground, Luo Zhen's figure appeared behind them. He lifted the two of them up by holding their backs. Zeus, with a loud shout, an afterimage of white galloped in the air. "Go back to the guild. Put the two on the body of Zeus," Luo Zhen said with a chuckle. Zeus was also taken aback when he first saw the two people covered in wounds. But after hearing Luo Zhen's order, Zeus didn't dare to neglect, and quickly led the two of them towards Fairy Tale. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.